Hello there and welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you how I changed the engine oil and filter in my 2011 Nissan Frontier. My Frontier is the SV Crew Cab model and it came with the 4-liter 6-cylinder engine. In case you didn't know, between model years 2005 and 2019, the Frontier came with two engine options, either a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder or a 4-liter 6-cylinder engine. This video covers the 4-liter 6-cylinder engine with the engine code VQ40DE. There are several models of the Frontier that came equipped with the VQ40DE engine, but the procedure shown in this video is applicable for all models. So stick around and you'll see just how easy it is to change the engine oil and filter. Here's the supplies that we're going to need for the oil change. We need a 14mm and an 8mm wrench. We're going to need something to drain the old oil into, like an oil drain pan. We're going to need a funnel for adding the new oil to the engine. We're going to need some paper towels for helping with some cleanup. And of course, we're going to need a new filter and new oil. Now, everyone has their favorite oil and filter brand, so choose the one that you're comfortable with or like. For oil, in addition to the brand, you'll need to decide between conventional, synthetic, or a blend of the two. Now, there's a ton of videos out there that can provide you with information about which type of oil to use, so I'm not going to cover that in this video. The important thing is that you get the amount and weight of the oil correct. Since I'll be replacing the filter with this change, I need the full 5 quarts. Now, the recommended oil weight from Nissan for this engine is 5W30. So let's roll over to the truck and get started. The first thing I want to show you is how to access the oil filter and the oil pan without the need to jack the truck up, put it up on ramps, or elevate it in any way. Start by turning the wheels all the way to the right side of the truck, just like if you were going to take a hard right turn. And if you look inside this area here, you'll see the location of the filter. This is where you can reach in and remove the old filter and install the new one. You can see this drip pan here under the oil filter that directs the oil that's going to drain from the filter through this little port and the plastic down here. We'll be opening up this little port here in a minute. And now if you look down below the frame of the truck and towards the back of the truck, you'll spot the oil pan which has the drain plug in it. Let's start by removing the plastic access panel for the oil filter. This panel is located at the center of and right underneath the front bumper. To remove it, we'll use the 8mm wrench, and there's 2 screws to remove, one on each side of the panel. If it's been a while since you've changed your oil, these might be a little bit difficult to get out. I learned a while back that if you put some lubricant on these, like WD-40, these screws will come out and go back in a lot easier. And once the panel's off, you're able to see the filter. Now place the oil drain pan underneath this opening in the plastic and remove the existing filter. You can reach in from the wheel well and turn the filter counterclockwise until it comes off. You'll see some oil start to drain out as you begin to loosen it, and this is totally normal. I like to back the old filter out until it's almost off, and then as I make the last little bit of turn, I rotate the threaded side of the filter up toward the hood. This keeps as much of the old oil as possible inside the filter rather than it dumping out and creating a mess. The next step is to install the new filter, but before I install it, I like to prep and precondition the new filter with some fresh oil. There's a couple of things to do here. I'll pour about a full filter amount of oil into the filter itself. This coats the filter media with oil, and I'll explain at the end of the video why I do this every time I change the oil. I'll rub some of that oil on the outer seal of the filter, and this conditions the seal so that it's easier to tighten and helps it seat against the oil cooler on the engine. I spin the filter around a couple times to make sure that it gets coated all the way around. And sometimes there's a little bit of excess oil that'll drain out. Just make sure that you do this either over a rag or some paper towels or something to catch that extra oil. Now we're ready to install the new filter. We're going to reach in through the wheel well and screw it onto the oil cooler. Screw the filter on clockwise until you feel it just start to press up against the oil cooler. Per the owner's manual, proper installation requires screwing the filter on an additional 2/3 of a full spin after it makes initial contact with the oil cooler surface. Keep in mind when you're screwing the filter on that it should be relatively easy and shouldn't require a lot of force. If yours seems to be putting up a fight, you might be cross-threading it. If this is the case, back the filter off and try again. You definitely don't want to mess up these threads. With the new filter installed, we'll do a little bit of cleanup on the oil drip pan and surrounding area, and this will keep from making a mess on your driveway when all this is done. Now that the filter is installed, we need to reinstall the plastic access panel with those two 8mm bolts. This wraps up the filter portion of the oil change. Alright, now let's move on back to the oil plug and drain the old oil out of the engine. And be sure to slide the oil drain pan back with you and center it underneath the oil plug. And we're going to reach in from the wheel well or the side of the truck and use that 14mm wrench to remove the oil drain bolt. Turn this counterclockwise to break it loose, and once it's loose, you should be able to unscrew it the rest of the way by hand. Now, while the oil is draining, I wanted to talk a little bit about the copper crush washer that goes on the oil pan bolt and seals the bolt to the pan. Nissan recommends changing this washer every time you change the oil. They do not recommend reusing it. And you can change this washer if you want to, but I've got a little over 192,000 miles on my truck, and I've done dozens of the oil changes myself, and I've never changed this washer. I'm not saying not to change it, but I haven't had any issues. Now, if you're missing the washer or you lose the washer, you're probably going to want to get one and make sure to install it. Once the oil that's draining gets down to just a little drizzle, it's pretty much finished draining. Now we'll reinstall the drain bolt and washer by turning the bolt clockwise, and you should be able to start the threads and screw the bolt in most of the way by hand. Just like with the oil filter, if this bolt seems to be putting up a fight, it might be trying to cross thread. If that's the case, I would back it out and try again. And when you get the bolt to where it's just seated against the oil pan, you can grab that 14mm wrench to tighten it down to seal. And Nissan recommends a range for the torque specification on this bolt, and it's 22 to 29 foot-pounds. I don't think I've used a torque wrench to actually torque this bolt to spec. I usually just tighten it until it feels tight and isn't leaking. We can check for leaks after we filled the engine with oil and let the truck run for about 10 minutes or so. Make sure to clean the little bit of oil off of the oil pan, and now we're ready to fill the engine with the new oil. Now up in the engine bay, there's two items of interest. First is the cap where the oil gets poured into the engine, and second is the dipstick that's used for checking the oil level. Both of these are located on the driver's side of the engine. Now let's start by unscrewing and removing the oil cap. We'll install the funnel and pour the oil into the engine. Now you're going to use pretty much the full 5-quart container of oil. Nissan recommends using 4 7/8 quarts when the oil change includes replacing of the oil filter. And we'll always check the oil level to make sure that we didn't over or underfill it. Now there's a little bit of a trick to getting the dipstick in and out of the neck that it sits in. When you remove it, as you're pulling up, rotate the dipstick about 90 degrees counterclockwise towards the front of the truck. Now check the level, and you'll want to be between these two little holes on the dipstick. And there's a high level and a low level. And it's hard to see with the oil clean, but we're towards the top and we're good to go. For reinserting the dipstick, you'll want to start with the top towards the front of the truck at about the 6 o'clock position, and you'll rotate it about 90 degrees clockwise while you're pushing the stick down into the neck. Now we want to remove the funnel and reinstall the oil cap. We have two last things that we need to do to wrap up the oil change. First, we need to start up the engine and circulate that fresh oil. Here's where you'll see why I always precondition the filter before installation. If you watch the oil pressure gauge, it always takes a couple seconds to register pressure after you first start the engine. This represents a situation where your engine is running relatively dry with just the residual oil in the engine. This is unavoidable and happens every single time you start the engine. What I've noticed is that if you don't precondition the new filter, the oil pressure takes just a little bit longer to build up the first time you start the engine after the oil change. What this means is that the engine is running under that dry condition just a little bit longer than normal. Now I'm only talking an extra second or maybe 2, so it's not a huge deal, but to me it's something simple that you can do to take better care of the engine. Now after we've let the engine run for 5 or 10 minutes, we can take a peek under the truck to check for any signs of leaking from the oil drain plug or the filter. The last thing we need to do is pour the old oil into an empty oil container and dispose of it in a legal way. In case you want to do some extra reading, your owner's manual has instructions for the oil change in the maintenance and DIY section of the manual. There's some simple written instructions and illustrations in that section. Thank you for watching this video, If you found it helpful, please consider liking it and or subscribing to the channel. In either case, thanks again and happy frontiering.